Let's make magic.
Too hot for TV.
Welcome back to Doctor Who Too Hot for TV. We are the podcast that looks at all things Doctor Who Extended Universe. Today, I am once again joined by Liam. Liam, welcome.
Lovely to be here, where every day is 1989.
Very true. So we're going to do something a bit different today. I say a bit different, you know, I'm up for doing anything and constantly doing different things. So I don't know why it would be a bit different, but it's something we've not done before.
No, we've decided to go into different waters.
Yeah, so we're going to look at the scandalous life and times of JNT. And I don't just mean the book. I mean, we're going to look at his entire life.
We're deep diving JNT.
We have exposed ourselves to more JNT than he's
Then-
exposed himself to fans.
You know, I like to think that you and I, Dylan, today are the Bonnie Blue and Lily Phillips of JNT's oeuvre.
Indeed. So we've both reread the Richard Marson
Superb book, yeah.
The Life and Scandalous Times of John Nathan Turner. We've watched JNT's Mythmakers. We've watched BBV's JNT Uncut.
And that's not a reference of any kind for circumcision, much to my dismay.
Indeed. And we've listened to his memoirs that came out from Big Finish. So we have done our research.
I've been around the block more times than Pepsi and Perivale.
So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about each of these, but we'll probably jump around a bit because, you know, they inevitably relate to each other as we try and paint a picture for ourselves and for the listeners as to what JNT was like.
Yeah.
And the highs and lows of his career, of which there are many.
God, there. Oh, yeah, it's like fucking Alton Towers.
But before we get started, what are your general thoughts before this of John Nathan Turner, the man, the producer, the potential sexual assaulter? We'll cut that bit.
All of the Dylan, you and I both know you don't cut this shit. So unlike Bill Baggs, who loves it uncut. Do you know what? Let's spin it back a little bit. So as I've said before, I'm a child of Generation Allen and the BBC Two repeats in the wilderness. I actually met John once, which was at a Longleat event in 1997,
right?
Which I believe was for the 20th anniversary of the Cybermen. That would have been 96, maybe. Yeah. So it was one of the events that John usually held each summer on the Longleat estate.
Yeah.
I'm presuming with the acknowledgement and permission of the marquee of the estate, but you never know with John. And I'll talk about this later. And you know, I went there, had a great day out. My abiding memory, as previous listeners will have known when I regaled them with anecdotes of this, my late father, who, if you like to resemble, looked like a cross between a Hot Point fridge and Tyson Fury. It was a fucking hot day. And I remember vividly being sat on the grass after being in a queue for Tom Baker, galloping down Calippo's, that's not a euphemism, and seeing John. And I said to my father, you know, I said, look, I'm fucked. You know, we were sitting there with one of those, I don't know if the listeners remember, those old fucking televisions you used to get, the mini TVs.
Yeah.
And we were watching the Hungarian Grand Prix on the grass, right? And it was just coming to the end. And Damon Hill was doing one of his world famous shit laps where he just got slower the closer he got to the finish. And I saw John and I said to my father, I said, can you go get my, I think it was Time Frame, one of my Bibles as a kid. Then you go get my Time Frame signed. So this 6'2" man who looked like, you know, he was about to go fucking off on one with Tommy Fury, approached John and asked John to sign it for this kind of slightly overweight young gypsy child on the grass. and John was, oh, yes, of course. Who's it to? So I met John tangentially with that, and he was very kind, he was very polite. He was very good to me. He was very polite. He was a good ambassador for the show. I didn't witness any assaults, unlike Mr. Marson. And so yeah, I mean, the 80s, I'll be honest with you, was probably my era of the show, because growing up in the early 90s, that was the most recent Who we had.
Mm.
And I loved the fact that each of the three men he cast in the role was so radically different and the antithesis of each other.
Yeah.
So coming into that era, John Nathan Turner was really kind of the architect of a lot of the Doctor Who that I kind of first digested as a young lad.
Yeah.
So you could say he was the progenitor of a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, for me, he was someone that he was always present at Doctor Who
Mhm.
conventions that I went to. So I saw him around a lot as a kid. I'm sure I met him and got his autograph, but
Right.
I don't really remember a specific interaction or anything like that. He was just always there.
Mhm.
Like you, I'm a child of the 80s and 90s. The McCoy era is my era of the show.
Represent.
And I still love it to this day. And then when the show was coming out on videos, it was things like Earthshock and Resurrection and Remembrance and stuff like that, like the more sort of actiony Doctor Who that I was into.
Hmm.
So I look at his era very fondly. I think it's got its ups and downs, and he made some bad choices, but I think he made far more good choices than he made bad choices.
Yeah, I think that's a fair statement, a very fair statement, actually.
I think he's also the first producer who really had to contend with fans. I know the sort of organised fandom was around properly since sort of the end of the Let's era and stuff like that.
Sure. Yeah.
But by the time JNT is in charge of the show, Doctor Who fans are in their 20s, mid-20s, things like that.
We've got the Gary Lees and the Vincent Brutskis, and these guys are legion. They're hardcore by this point.
They're hardcore, they're organised, and they're vocal.
Yeah.
And so he has to contend with young adults
as opposed to young teens and children.
Yeah,
exactly.
Absolutely. So he bears the brunt of their happiness and their anger in spade load.
Too hot for TV.
So the first thing we're going to look at is John Nathan Turner's Mythmakers, which was released in December of 1990 from Real Time Pictures. News at the time, waiting in the wings. If Doctor Who comes back at all as a live-action television programme, it will now not be until 1992, according to reliable sources within BBC Enterprises, which, I guess...
was correct.
Yeah.
It wasn't, at least until 1992. They were correct.
Other news was the BSB Doctor Who weekend was first mooted, and despite the Daily Express feature, 10th of November, reporting that Dutch-born Guinness ad actor Rutger Hauer was announced as being the new big screen Doctor at the recent MIFED Film and Television Market in Milan, the proposed film's co-producer Peter Lytton was unable to confirm or deny this revelation. I'm afraid I am unable to say anything at the moment. Hopefully, we will be able to make an announcement soon, though.
If you spun forward to like 2007, Rutger Hauer was starring in Smallville, so he was doing any old shit by that point. They should have just waited a little bit.
And releases at the time, we had the book of the Curse of Fenric, and the comic strip was The Mark of Mandragora.
Great strip.
So this Mythmakers, first of all, it's 1990.
Yeah.
So he's basically still sat in the office at this point, or at least he's just about to leave. The show is over, but no one really knows how over it is.
Mm-hmm.
Like those news stories are saying, it'll probably be back in a couple of years. So where does this find John?
Of all the things that we've kind of delved into with this, I found this potentially, Dylan, one of the most, if not the most, fascinating, because it's an effective time capsule. Now, as you quite correctly say, this is so interesting because we're dealing with a John here that's not even 12 months off of filming The Curse of Fenric.
Yeah.
And this features Nick and Keith Barnfather taking John back to the locations used in Fenric. So we have the parish church, we have Miss Hardacre's cottage, and we have Crowborough Army Camp there. And it's fascinating because you're seeing a John almost in media res of how he was when he came out of season 26.
Yeah.
So there's a lovely little couple of segments, and Nick dances around the subject for quite a lot of it, but we'll get into that. Towards the end of it, where John says And they say, where are you? He said, well, I've only just recently been released from the BBC. I'm now a freelancer.
Oh, yeah.
I'm now looking forward to new opportunities. There may be an opportunity for another project with the BBC in the pipeline. Spinning forward to the BBV that we're going to talk about later, it seems apparent that now that was going to be an adaptation of a book that he and Alan Waring had optioned while they were doing location shooting for Ghostlight and Survival, which never came off the ground. But John's very optimistic, it's fascinating watching this because he refuses to use the words cancel. He refuses to use the words postponed. He dances around the word hiatus a couple of times.
Yeah.
But it's very clearly apparent at this point to me, watching him, that he believes the show has just taken a sabbatical.
Yeah. Like it had done.
Yeah. And, 1990, we're looking at the then Thatcher government's producer choice legislation coming, where everything has to be at least offered to be outsourced to private companies for independent television. And it looks increasingly apparent, like his contemporaries at the time, your Powells and your Peter Cragines, have basically given him the intimation that this show may well come back 2, 3, 4 years down the line as an independent production with somebody like Cinema Verity.
Yeah.
So John seems weirdly detached and almost sanguine that his part of the show has come to the end.
Yeah, because he'd been trying to get out for a while.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's one thing he says in his memoirs, it's like, well, when he was trying to get out, it was business as usual when he went back in the office. He wasn't treading water at any point.
Yeah.
But I don't think, because there's a point in the show's history where John is seen by fandom as the man who killed Doctor Who.
Absolutely. But we've not reached that point at this point.
He's not there yet. Fandom isn't there yet. What this interview is, though, is quite infamous for the fact that J&T promised revelations and didn't really give any.
No, absolutely. He's still very much for a man that's left the BBC and makes a point of saying he's a freelancer, he's very much still towing the corporate line here.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you kind of would expect that. I mean, if any of us had been in the same kind of working environment for a decade plus, we're talking with John, before Who, he's come in and he's been doing, things like the Palaces. He's been a BBC employee on and off since, the late 60s. So this is a man shaking off that mindset. And that's fascinating,
Yeah. He gives very concise answers and sometimes quite short ones. So he'll never say, I'm not going to answer that. But he'll just be like, this is my answer. Let's move on.
Yeah.
But also, I think Briggs is a little bit on the attack here.
I certainly think Nick Briggs hasn't honed the genial conversationalist persona that he adopts now when he does his In Conversations on Big Finish.
Yeah.
He's very much a terrier of an interviewer here.
Yeah.
He wants dirt. I don't think it's a negative thing. I think he just wants to bolster meaty headlines for this product.
Yeah. And I think Nick is almost in this interview, because this is probably one of the first interviews
post Who
that he's given.
Yeah.
Nick is almost the voice of fandom going, well, why did you do this? Why did you do that?
Yeah, absolutely.
And also for the first time, one of the first interviewers and interviews where they're able to take JNT's Doctor Who as a whole and go, this is it as a complete thing.
As an entity, yeah, absolutely.
What went wrong, what went right. And it's quite interesting. They talk about, Nick brings up the backlash against Colin Baker's Doctor.
And I was going to touch on this, Dylan. And this is one of the reasons I found this fascinating. And I would urge listeners to watch it themselves, because I'd love to hear their interpretations of it. This is possibly, there may be other instances, but I would like to be corrected if it's not. This, I believe, is the only time John, I can recall, has referred to Colin being the word sacked.
Yeah.
You watch the BBV, I was told to tell Colin his services are no longer required. This is 2.5 years after the producer of a long-running serial has had to tell the man he's cast in the role that he's been sacked at the behest of the Sixth Floor.
Yeah.
That not only is unprecedented for a lot of drama, it's a first for Who, possibly still the only time for Who, although, let's not go there. But that word and the connotations of that word, it's the first time I can recall John ever using that in context there.
Yeah.
And he does, and he's not dancing around the subject. He's not being diplomatic on the subject. As you quite correctly said there, it's a concise answer. It's a factual answer. He's not embellishing it or trying to dissuade with flowery or ebullient language. It's just, that's what happened.
Yeah. But they talk about this backlash. And what he actually means is this is a Nick Briggs and an interview that is coming from the world of fandom. Because, John goes, well, we've got statistics in the office that say that wasn't the case. And if you're 8 years old, the prime audience for Doctor Who, that wasn't the case.
Yeah, of course.
What there was 10,000 members of the DWAS who suddenly didn't like this version of Doctor Who.
Yeah, when Gary Lee's sitting there up till 3 a.m. writing 26 letters a night.
Yeah.
It's a rather different litmus test.
Yeah. Do you walk away from this sort of thinking, oh, I know JNT a bit better? Are we getting the real JNT here?
No, this is very much a corporate, John, but it's fascinating watching this, because with the informed reaction of having read Richard's book and extrapolating that and contrasting it with the interview that John did with Bill Baggs towards the end of his life in 2004, just prior to the show's resurrection, what I found really interesting is that where psychologically John is at this point in his life here. John is still coming to terms with the fact, I wouldn't go so far as to say it's the cancellation of Doctor Who. I would say it's the end of his tenure as a BBC employee.
Yeah.
And he's still coming to terms with that, as indeed all of us would be when we leave a job, And John's trying to define who he is now that Doctor Who is in the past.
Yeah. And I think he's quite hopeful for the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think he's pleased that his time on Doctor... he'd been trying to get away from Doctor Who since the 20th anniversary.
Yeah. And you realise just how much of a long road it was. And, we'll touch on it. There's so many... I'm not going to use the word mistakes, because I think it presents it with a negative connotation. I think there were errors in timing and errors in decisions that hastened the road that Doctor Who was on, because we can't really argue with figures that we tabulate. And the reality of it is, in November 83, we had the cover of the Radio Times. We had a 20th anniversary 90-minute special. It was broadcast during Children in Need. It was a thing around the world. And then 18 months after that, we've got a show that is effectively, it is cancelled.
Yeah.
Our lead's gone, and we've replaced him with a very, very good character actor who we've saddled with a costume that looks like Krusty the Clown's fucking knickers, and made him so that he's playing it like Malcolm Tucker on steroids.
It's interesting, isn't it, that after Doctor Who's big anniversaries, there is inevitably a decline, apart from the 10th anniversary, but people didn't really know it was the 10th anniversary.
Yeah.
Like, after the 20th, I'm not talking about quality of the show necessarily here, but it's almost like when a big celebration happens, the public all go, we love Doctor Who, and then they put it away again slowly and drift away. It happened after the 20th. It happened after the 50th. It happened after the 60th. Like, for the 60th, everybody came back because David Tennant was back. For the 50th, everybody came back because David Tennant was back.
Yeah.
But it's not just that.
But he had a different hairstyle.
He did have a different hairstyle. Okay. They come back for those sort of big multi-doctor things, event television.
Absolutely.
And then it just sort of drifts away again and becomes less popular and less talked about. And that's fine, not every episode can be Day of the Doctor.
I don't think that's a television thing. I think that's just kind of the nature of how we as a species and as people digest our entertainment. I think inevitably, and we'll touch on this later, when we bring ourselves up to 2025 and certain illusions there. But I think all brands of entertainment and all concepts naturally need time away to permeate themselves in the public consciousness again, and to make people feel nostalgic again. No Time to Die came out it would have been 2020, but we're talking it was shot 2019, in post 2019. The public now are really hungry to see what Bezos does with James Bond.
Yeah.
But that's because it's been away and not in production for 6-7 years.
Yeah.
We're hungry for it now. And I think that is necessary to the brand. Harry Potter with She Who Shall Not Be Named at the helm.
Yeah.
We're now seeing a new generation that are going to get their Snape, their Dumbledore.
Yeah.
You know, that is the nature of how we digest things. And I think that is what people kind of forget about Doctor Who, because they believe it's a Leviathan that just goes on and on and on.
And they want it to go on and on. Television isn't made how it was 30, 40 years ago. And serialized television, which is what the classic series was, just isn't a thing really anymore. Doctor Who, as it exists, feels like a very short serialized bit of TV at the moment. It's just there. You want it to be a big event bit of television that is on it probably every 18 months and everybody gets excited about. But in order to do that, it needs a bit of time away.
It does.
And it needed a bit of time. I would have loved to have seen McCoy carry on for another season or two, but it needed time away then as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
The show was creatively in a good place, but it needed more money and more time.
And you know, one of the main things I've taken away from this is, and I try to look at it not as somebody who is a fan of that show. I try to look at it as in media res of what's going on in culture at that time and what's going on politically, because everything's fucking political, you know. And it always makes me laugh when people say, "Oh, I don't like politics," because it informs fucking everything. It underpins life. But Doctor Who ended in 1989 for a variety of reasons, but chiefly amongst them was the fact that you had a generation of television and programming executives who were Oxbridge educated, that had grown up, who feared more than anything else being made the object of ridicule amongst their own support network. You had got people like Jonathan Powell, who had come up as a young, thrust-in executive who had produced things like Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. He had come up through the ranks. He had gone to people like Bill Sellers at BBC. He had impressed people enough like that. And he'd got into the positions of power because he was fucking good at what he did. And people like him, people like Cregine, people like Michael Grade are going to come in, and this is part of their job, and are going to look at it and say, All Creatures Great and Small has been on God knows fucking how long that was by that point, 15 years. Doctor Who's been on by 25, 26 years. It's natural to say, we need to open up the schedules, we need to look at things, and we need to see if this is going to have any life moving forward, and more importantly, if it's going to be a financially recompense for the BBC, which we pay for. So it's a vicious circle. You need to rethink about how you're going to make that financially viable.
Yeah, and they're not interested in Doctor Who that's 20, 25 years old. They're interested in the tripods. They're like, to say like they hated all science fiction and stuff is sort of, it's not really true, because when you get things like the tripod and even bugs and things like that, where they're like, no, we're trying to make science fiction for the modern age that can compete with things like V and stuff like that coming over from America. And that's what they do. And they don't think it's worth trying to rebrand and put loads of money into this, what they perceive as a stale old program.
Yeah, absolutely. And I firmly believe, from looking at all of these productions and seeing not just where John was, but where the industry was at the time, I do firmly believe the original pre-Seagal approach idea was that with producer choice, who was going to go off air? It would probably be off air for about 3-4 years. It would probably relaunch around about the 30th anniversary as an independent production with somebody like Cinema Verity doing it. And that would be its new lease of life, because you are dealing with a BBC that are doing contemporaneously things like A Year in Provence and El Dorado. And, you know, these are prestige products, and they wanted Doctor Who, they wanted it to make money for them again, because, you know, if there's anything we can see by looking back at old DWMs of this time, fucking hell, the VHSs were making money for them. So that nobody's going to say, well, we're not going to do that. It's about how you make that generate as much revenue by putting in as little as you can.
But I reckon they looked at what Doctor Who was making, and it was making them good money. And they were like, it's archive that's making us money. So we can continue to obviously selling
and sell that.
They were selling the show around the world, but they were also putting a lot of money in to make the show.
Well, you touched on it there when you talked about the B Sky B weekends that were going on, that John himself presented. You know, it was repackaging that archive television in a digestible new form for 1990.
To steer us back onto track slightly.
Absolutely.
we'll move on from the myth makers in a minute, but I just want to get your sort of overall thoughts on the production, the interview. Like, is it a good production?
I think for what you would expect at that time, it's actually not entirely dissimilar to some of the OB stuff that Who itself was doing in the late 80s.
I thought that as well.
Some of the shots that you see that Keith does of Kroger and some of the external shots of the church there are not dissimilar for some of the OB stuff that we saw on location of Fenric.
Yeah.
As far as the interview's concerned, as you correctly said, you've got Nick Briggs, who at this point in his career is very much making the transition from fan to professional. You've got a John, which is slightly on the defensive because he might well still be in denial about the end of his tenure. So it's an interesting marriage of kind of confluence of time. It's a fascinating piece. It's a great one. I would just want to shout out there a moment of appreciation for Nick Briggs's run in the opening Firkin scene. Now, I've been around the block a few times, Dill. I've never seen a guy run from a fucking taxi into a church like that. He runs like somebody's trying to take his legs away from him. God, I mean, I don't know if he could do that now, but Nick, fuck me. If you can do that at a convention, I'll come and pay, man, just to watch that run.
My favourite moments, and it is a well shot, well put together piece.
Yeah.
It's a good interview. But there are two moments that really make me chuckle. One, they're stood like by a weird army training wall, and they've both got a leg up.
Is that where John's got his leg up? With the sock, the multicolored sock.
Yeah.
I fucking love that.
John's got his leg up. Nick's got his leg up. It's just very odd. And then the bit where
there's young men like doing training exercises behind them.
Yeah.
While these two old boys are having a kind of a Kate O'Mara off.
Exactly. And then the moment where he turns to the camera and says, "I'll be back" at the end.
Yeah. Pre-Terminator 2.
Yeah.
Arnie stole it from John. You heard it here first. I also love, because it's so fucking bizarre, that shot where when Nick comes in the church and meets John for the first time. Spoilers for those who haven't watched it. That's if we got spoilers for something that's nearly 40 years old. But John is sat on a fucking chair in the church on a throne with candles all around him. It's like he's trying to channel. I kept expecting him to go like, to channel the spirit of David Bowie from Labyrinth and tell me about the babe.
Brilliant. I don't want to rate this. I don't want to rate any of these. I think we'll just pick our favourite one at the end.
Oh, okay.
So there'll be no clanging, banging, or average meandering.
Well, that's what Gary Downey told me.
Too hot for TV.
So the next thing I want to talk about is JNT Uncut, which was released in May 2021, but it's actually an interview from 1995.
Oh, I stand corrected.
So it was shot as part of Bill Baggs's The Doctors documentary.
Right, okay. Is that the famous documentary where Peter Davison says Doctor Who is shit?
Yes.
Okay,
crap is what he says.
Okay,
actually.
good.
It's quite infamous because Doctor Who fans have got no sense of humour.
No.
He talks about he talks about a particular episode being crap, like Time Flight or something.
Yeah.
And then...
Which is not an inaccurate statement.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then he just uses... He's got a smile when he says it, but he just starts answering every question with, "It's crap, it's crap." And he's obviously taking the piss, but Doctor Who fans can't deal with that.
There's no nuance in the Who community.
Yeah, exactly. News at the time, the immersive theatrical adventure Time Fracture was announced.
Ooh.
Now, it had 42 live actors in it with 17 different worlds, but pre-recorded cameos from, now this is a fucking list, Tom Baker, Peter Davison, Colin Baker, Sylvester McCoy, Joe Martin, Jodie Whittaker, David Bradley, and Michael Troughton.
Fucking hell.
That's a fucking list and a half right there.
No David Burton?
No David Burton,
Bastards.
Unfortunately. Justice for Burton. Other news, there was a film about Delia, Derbyshire announced, and releases, we had Fellowship of the Ink from Big Finish, Doctor Who and the Underworld, the audiobook, the Lost TV episodes, which is another repackaged soundtracks thing, and other big finishes. We had Ravagers, dear God,
that was fucking atrocious.
The Third Doctor Adventures Volume 7, and the Ruby's Curse from BBC Books.
No, Ravagers would have been a lot better if Nick Briggs had run through it.
I ran through it. I listened to
on
that
2.5 speed.
I did eventually finish it for the podcast, but when it came out, I bought it and I did not finish it. It was just impenetrable.
Even Chris Eccleston's performance in that, it's like he's discovered
really
narcolepsy.
So 1995, where is JNT at this point in his life?
Now, this is much more interesting because this is in a cafe, I believe, in Saltdean on the Brighton coast. And John's much more reflective now.
Yeah.
He's still got his sleeves rolled up of his
course.
blazer, which I thought was quite nice. But we've moved on from the cream to the dark. So it's like he's channeling Sylvester's costume choices. But yeah, John's much more reflective now. The answers are not quite so kind of highly stylized media sound bites. They're a bit more free form. They're a bit longer. And the use of although certain anecdotes are repeated, I felt this was as close to a conversation with the man as opposed to a pre-recorded interview with a subject as the Mythmakers was.
Yeah. It's the most honest I think I've ever seen him.
Yeah.
It's
agreed.
still, it's not quite warts and all. And he refuses. I mean, I will get to this a bit more in his memoirs and then in his book. Like, he refuses to be scandalous and salacious, which is pretty wild considering that's what he was like reportedly in film.
Yeah, Dickie Marson tells us absolutely to the contrary. But you know, but yeah, I would agree with that statement. It's the most open I've found of all of this medium of John retrospectively looking back at his time on the show through a lens of a mea culpa. And we'll get onto it. You know, that I've made several notes for this, but there's some interesting things. This is where a lot of the archival vox pops that we see on a lot of the DVDs and Blu-rays to this day with John originate.
Yeah.
So we do have something to thank Bill Baggs for. But it's interesting. This is where John admits that, and he openly says, he said, if there was a failing with the Sixth Doctor, he refuses to say it's Colin's performance, which again, I would agree with. He said it was the costume. I got the costume wrong.
Yeah.
And he openly says that. And that is in a contrast to the Mythmakers.
Yeah.
Where it's very much the consequences of, quote unquote, the sacking.
Yeah. And also, this is the interview where he says, and it's used in the documentary, I may go down in history as the man who killed Doctor Who.
Which, and ultimately, that own quote proved a bit of an epitaph for him.
Yeah.
I think that this is, and again, it's interesting you use that quote because I think this is somewhat of an epiphany for John.
Yeah.
I think you can see as that conversation evolves, and Bill, let's not forget at this point, is as much of a fan as Nick was back in 1990.
Yeah.
And he's confronting John with, and I would disagree with several of the points that Bill tries to make, but he's confronting John with perceived fan received wisdom.
Yeah.
That John is then forced to say, well, no, I don't agree with that, but here's why I don't agree with it.
Yeah. It's a very weird thing, which you don't get as much anymore at conventions, where both Briggs to a certain extent, but definitely Bill here, come with a sort of fan entitlement, and as you say, fan wisdom.
Yeah.
Of like, oh, but you were wrong. And yeah, I'm sure J&T was wrong about certain things. So was Philip Hinchcliffe. So was Peter fucking Bryant.
But Innes Lloyd was never wrong because he was never fucking there.
Because we as fans think we know what's best for the show. But actually, these people are given the guardianship of the show for some reason.
Of course, yeah.
And also, like, it's a job. People make mistakes in their jobs all the time. And perhaps we don't ever know, like, the full circumstances behind certain decisions. And do I agree with all of J&T's decisions? No. But it really annoys me, and you used to see it at conventions as well. People used to love going for J&T in interviews.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think he was mistreated by a lot of fans.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Like, over the years. And I think, quite frankly, I'm not talking about Nick Briggs, because Nick is doing his job, a paid job there.
Yeah.
And even Bill to a certain extent here. But the entitlement of fans to think that they can just berate this man. We can all have our opinions, but like...
But I don't walk into Waitrose and tell the man behind the cheese counter, bro, you cut me a shit bit of cheddar. But as a fan of a TV show, I think there is an element of a fan's entitlement where we think, well, no, I didn't enjoy episode 2 of season 16. So I am going to tell that fucker that I didn't enjoy it. And I'm going to outline to him the 27 points why I didn't enjoy it. But at the end of the day, I think it's very important to have empathy, to have sympathy for people and say, these are people trying to do a job. And just because you or I might not necessarily chime with certain aspects, certain eras, certain aspects of the role, or the finished product, it doesn't really give us any right to lambast these people publicly.
Yeah. So obviously the camera is locked off on John. We only hear Bill sort of muttering in the background because he's obviously not planning to use his questions. This is a production. It's a bit of a piss take in it. So number one, this was never meant to be released as it was. It was an interview shot for a documentary.
Yeah, just to have vox pops kind of cut in. Yeah, absolutely.
But Bill, being Bill, eventually goes, well, I've got this full thing. We should release it. And I'm glad he did, because it's a good interview and it's an honest interview and it's a real snapshot of JNT's life at the time.
I actually think that and as much as I can see, and I know why Bill's done it. He's done it as you pardon the pun, a financial imperative, not a zero imperative. But I think that in so doing, releasing this, especially posthumously after all this time after John's passing, that you do really get out of all of the mediums that we're going to discuss today, a genuine sense of how John presents himself to the world.
Yeah, absolutely. But also, I'm a bit annoyed at how Bill Baggs presents this interview. Okay, it's called JNT Uncut. It's the raw footage from the interview, but tidy it up a little bit.
Yeah,
this is literally the rushes. When the camera's turned off, we see the camera get turned off, then there's a blank, and then there's a bit more. It's like, it doesn't take much to turn the camera on, do a little introduction, go, this is how this came about. This is what it is. It wasn't meant to be like an interview, so it is just one static shot.
It reminds me very much of Robert Llewellyn's old camcorder series on Channel 4. But there's no fucking presenting. There's no, top and tail. It's just, here's your raw footage. We took John out. We probably told him we were going to buy him a chocolate eclair and a curly whirly. And he got a cup of tea that he himself, the poor bastard, said it's gone cold after he's answered after questions.
And there's moments in it where like they're waiting for someone's making a coffee and there's a load of noise. It's like, I know it's uncut, but we can do without
There's a lovely cameo from what I presume is the cafe owner who asks them, I think only about 7 minutes in, have you got everything you need? And we've not even covered fucking Meglos. You sit there going, no, we're going to be here for a little bit longer, man. He wants another cold coffee.
Like, I'm all for seeing interesting little bits between the takes, but him waiting for the sound or going, oh, I shouldn't have had a pasty, is not really...
I quite like that on a t-shirt, actually.
I shouldn't have had that.
I shouldn't have had that pasty. John Nathan Turner, 1995. I'm like, if you see me at a convention, boys and girls, and I got that on, then you'll know it's fucking me.
Amazing. Yeah,
you don't get that in Forbidden fucking Planet, do you?
I'll be on the Too Hot for TV Red Bubble anytime soon.
Absolutely. Yeah, consult Dylan's Etsy.
Anything else we want to say about this interview?
Oh, God, fucking... Do you know what? I made some notes on this one because it was purely the point where there were so many things. So I've never heard the adjective Tom-ized before. So he actually talks about, he didn't like the undergraduate humour of season 17. And he talks about how Tom had taken vast swathes of the script and Tom-ized everything. I've never heard of the term Tom-ized before. I thought that was fucking brilliant because you can just see that John literally sitting there watching Tom say, this is whippet shit. No, fuck that. No. But the one thing that I really wanted to bring up, because it's the first time I've heard this, Dylan, and please feel free to correct me if you heard it to the contrary. Now, they touch on, and it's probably the most honest section that deals with the fallout from the post-trial Eric Saywood departure of all these mediums, because when we'll get on the memoirs skirt on this very tacitly. It doesn't really go into depths with it, what you would call the dirt, quote unquote. But what I found most interesting in this is that Bill talks to John about the aftermath of the Starburst interview. He talks to John about what happened, and he confronts John with another one of these kind of received frown wisdom things and says, John, when you had Pip and Jane in the office talking about what was going to be for their version of part 14, and you had the Polaroids on the desk because you couldn't legally show them anything that Eric had in his version, you actually had a lawyer present. And John corrects him. And John says, no, it wasn't a lawyer. It was actually June Collins, my production associate, who was in there, who I wanted as an independent witness to say that I hadn't bought anything from Eric's account. Now, Dylan, I always thought that was a lawyer.
Yeah,
in the
me too.
stories. And if you hear Pip and Jane talking about it, I believe on the DVDs, they mention a lawyer. But John actually says in this, no, it was June Collins.
Yeah.
And I've never heard that in any other medium, ever.
Absolutely, me neither. It came as a bit of a shock to me. And it is full of these little nuggets. And we've seen this footage a lot, so I think or some of it a lot, so it's quite easy to think we've seen it all before. But I'm still like, this is the best interview that exists with JNT for my money.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, maybe there's some other bits that might show up on a box set at some point, but for me, this is like head and shoulders above.
This is undiluted, John.
Yeah, he may not be uncut, but he's undiluted.
No.
Too hot for TV.
The John Nathan Turner Memoirs.
Ah, yes, indeed.
Now, these were released by Big Finish in November of 2000, although they'd been a Doctor Who magazine article a few years beforehand. News at the time, there would be a new range of Paul McGann Doctor Who audios with a brand new theme by David Arnold. We all know how that ended up.
We do.
And the Death Comes to Time pilot was in production as well, so it was all new Doctor Who.
Well, one of those ended really well, and one of those has been excised from everybody apart from Stephen Fry's CV.
Releases at the time, we had The Holy Terror featuring the Sixth Doctor and Frobisher, Professor Bernie Summerfield and the Doomsday Manuscript. BBV were releasing The Rani Reaps the Whirlwind. The EDA was Endgame. The PDA was The King of Terror with the Fifth Doctor, Tegan and Turlough. The Robots of Death was released on DVD. The comic strip was The Autonomy Bug featuring 8 and Izzy, and Howe's Transcendental Toy Box was first published. Here we are, the man, the myth, the life story. How does John come across in this version?
Well, before we begin our dissection of this particular part of John's oeuvre, can I just say here, I really want to give props to the incidental music at the beginning of this, because fuck me, this sounds like the Rimmer Experience from Red Dwarf. The music is literally John. I kept expecting him to go on about Arnold Rimmer's selfless bravery and wonder. Yeah, this is very much, this is John. And as with all of things with a memoir, going all the way back from Kenneth Williams to Prince Harry writing Spare, there is an element here of a bit of revisionist history rewriting going on. This is very carefully worded, very carefully edited sound bites and quote-unquote funny anecdotes. And there are some good ones in here, don't get me wrong. There are also some incredibly strange and slightly kind of politically incorrect ones.
Yeah.
But it's very much a sanitized version of John's decade in the role.
Absolutely. And you'd think it's been a decade since he's done the job at this point, that perhaps we'd get a little bit more than what we get here. But this is what I would describe as the Andrew Pixley approach to John Nathan Turner's life.
It's very much kind of tabulating facts and figures and stories.
And the first time I heard this, I thought it was boring as fuck. I actually quite enjoyed it this time because it is interesting. I don't think John is the best reader of his own words.
No.
It's nice to hear his voice, but at the same time,
I think his more success is when he's free flowing in conversation. I think he feels a bit restricted by the format.
Yeah, he's performing, isn't he? He's trying to perform as best as possible, and you can see why he didn't really have a future as a television presenter.
Turner the Bunsen burner was not in full effect here.
And it's very much my time on Doctor Who. He talks a little bit about his early life. He never once mentions his relationship with Gary Downey, which you'd think you would mention at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. It's conspicuous by its absence.
He mentions friendships he builds up with the stars of Doctor Who, which is, there's many stories to be told there. But
I think they're just.
And Richard Marson will tell them for us.
Underneath a desk.
Yeah.
Underneath the desk.
But as you say, it's very sanitized, but it does, for me, provide a good overview of his time on the show.
Yeah.
He doesn't stray away from the Eric Saywood situation, the Colin Baker situation, the end of the show. But we're back in that territory of BBC answers.
Absolutely, yeah. This is a press release memoir. It's very, you could easily cut and paste several of the sections here and put them into an official PR release with very little difficulty.
It is surprising that certain things get through. I mean, there's two stories in there that sort of stuck out. Number one, that a national newspaper offered to republish the memoirs if he went and did the more salacious stuff, and he refused, which is, again, it seems insane to me, sort of a decade on.
And this is, we would be dealing contemporaneously with things like the News of the World at this time.
And serialized memoirs were a big thing in papers at this time.
Absolutely.
The other story that stuck out, which is, I mean, this is John blackmailing somebody. A member of the press is about to leak a story, I think, about Peter Wingard's
sexuality.
And like Peter Wingard got arrested for cottaging at some point.
Yeah, well, he wasn't, he didn't hide who he was. So,
But I think the journalist sort of sees it as, well, sick pervert cast in family show. They're looking for
there's an angle that's the angle they want to portray it with. Yeah.
And so John tries to stop the guy and can't. So he says, well, if you print the story, I'm going to tell everybody that we slept together last night. And so he doesn't print the story.
Which I'm willing to bet is not the way that we do production on the new season of Fool Me Once with Richard Armitage at Netflix.
Absolutely not. And so in one hand, he's looking out for his cast. He's looking out for the reputation of the show. On the other hand, he is literally lying and blackmailing somebody.
It's astonishing, isn't it? It's just... But then again, it shows you a snapshot of how, things were at that time and how that sort of behavior could be considered to be an acceptable quid pro quo. And I'm not, the journalist's actions are reprehensible in trying to effectively kind of criminalize someone based on their sexual proclivities. But then actively blackmailing such a journalist, I mean, that's you're dealing with very morally grey areas there.
Exactly. Other stories that stick out?
Well, what I'm going to say, Dylan? I'm going to talk about the Fenric one. I'm going to talk about the Fenric one. When they're at Lulworth Cove, you know what I'm going to say here. And if any of you listen to the memoirs, you know what I'm about to say. So John is directing some second unit at Lulworth Cove. I believe the Pete and Fenric with the Russian soldiers, where they've discovered the ship underneath the wave.
Yeah.
And you've got the first exsanguinated victim to the hemovores. And the way John tells it, he was out on a small boat. There was a cameraman, and they'd organised it because the waters around Lulworth were so deathly cold. They were trying to keep the artists out of the water for as much as possible and only do it when they need to do the shots, with the cameraman in wetsuits down there getting the shots ready. And one of the supporting artists who was playing one of the Russian soldiers at the 11th hour, whilst out on the boat, then decided they did not want to go down and do that shot.
Yeah.
And this is an exact quote here, ladies and gentlemen. John has one of the props boys that is on the boat with him. And John, they talk about it. So John is directing this, and John is physically on there. Now, the guy's called John. Now, it's become quite apparent to the producer they haven't got enough time to go back to shore to get another essay, to get to do this shot. So one of this young prop lad, also called John, nominates himself, says, look, I'll do it. And then John notices that the young man's ethnicity might not necessarily marry with shall we say, historical accuracy of Russian soldiers in the 1940s.
Indeed.
And I'm not going to repeat the exact quote that John says. You'll know what the anecdote is if you listen to it, boys and girls. But the second and third words of it are "him up." And it's just astonishing that anecdote, as recently as this Big Finish was released, is considered to be a jovial story with no potentially politically correct connotations.
Indeed. And he even finishes it with it. He laughed, so clearly I hadn't offended him. So he knew that there was a chance that
it might not go down the right way. Yeah, it's bizarre, and it doesn't reflect well on John. But I also think that it doesn't. It's very indicative of where culturally people were in 1989, especially in industries like the television industry. It's easy to sit back and judge that through a 2025 lens.
Yeah.
But you have to just sit there and say, I don't agree with that. I don't like that. But it comes from a different time where I was not part of.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But that, God knows how that managed to get through. Jesus.
I'd love to know what didn't get through.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Because it's weird that those two bits get through, but he's not willing to sort of gossip about anybody at the same time.
No, there's no tittle tattle.
Yeah, which is odd because he is a notorious gossip.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think it's the right decision for him to present himself in this way?
If I was a PR, I would say this is probably John in damage limitation mode, because he's trying to exercise an element of control a decade plus after leaving the role, of presenting his version of his memoirs. And as with all of us, if any of us sat down and wrote an autobiography of our lives, I'm sure there's certain things you would excise, Dill. I mean,
Absolutely.
I mean, pretty much anything before the age of 14, I think, would be out of mine. Anything I did back in Dublin, lads, never happened. But yeah, I can understand why he's done it. I think it's an element of him trying to regain a bit of control over his own destiny.
Where is he in his life at this point?
I think John's realised that, for better for worse, there may not be any other upcoming opportunities that would eclipse his reputation professionally as what was then the last producer of Doctor Who. So I think he's trying to kind of capitalize on that and make as much as he can financially and professionally out of that reputation, which I don't blame him for. And I think it's really to only be expected at this kind of late point in the game.
Yeah. Do you think he would have perhaps done a more, salacious is the wrong word, a more honest version of this at some point if he'd had lived?
Yeah, I think that it's one of the tragedies, I think, with John is that he never lived to see C21 Who under Russell and Stephen and Chris. I think that a lot of with John, I think John was haunted towards the end of his life with, as we've touched upon earlier, the idea that he's the person that killed off a British institution.
Yeah.
I think that had he lived and had that burden been removed from his shoulders, bolstered by the huge success that we enjoyed in 05 onwards, I think we would have seen a much more honest and measured take from John about where his place was in the history of the show.
Yeah, agreed. It's a shame he never got that, because this is around the time where people start talking a lot more honestly about classic Who.
Absolutely.
Because it's been dead for a decade.
Yeah.
The TV movies happened and it was not a success.
Yeah.
So people are willing to be a bit more honest. And that only starts to happen more when the show comes back. And as we're seeing on the collection box sets, while they've still got to toe a line, there's certainly the Matthew Sweets interviews get a lot more honest stuff out of people we've heard interviewed 1,000 times before.
And I think that a good 15 years down the road, I think we're going to see the same thing for what C21 Who has done.
Yeah.
I think that's just the nature of time. I mean, I'm always fascinated by the Survival DVD came out, I believe, 2007.
Yeah.
And the Endgame documentary on there that details the last few days of the show has interviews with people, not just our principals and our cast, our Sylvan Soul. We've got people like Colin Brake and we've got people like Preeta Krajine who are talking about institutionally what the BBC was as a corporate product in 1990 and why cancelling that programme was seen to be the best thing for its future existence.
Yeah.
And I think that sort of cold take on it could only have been done when we had the success of it returning in 2005.
Yeah. I think we were probably at a stage where people were starting to open up, certainly about the Eccleston era, and then Russell comes back, and so there's sort of a kibosh on anything like that. Like, I'm not saying it was in the works. I mean, the restoration team have said they would like to do the collection sets for the new series, but they want to get the classic series done beforehand.
Yeah.
But I think pre-Russell coming back, we were starting to get to a point where we could have had the collection volume 1 with an honest Billy Piper, maybe an Eccleston on there. It would have said exactly what it was like and how it happened.
Keith Boak in conversation.
Yeah. Well, quite.
I need it. That's what I need in my life.
Yeah, well, you know what they say, go Boak, go broke.
Yeah, that's it. That's why I don't let him come round and sit on my sofa, ladies and gentlemen, because the fucker sets it on fire.
Anything else to say on J&T's memoirs?
I think it's a very important product. I think that I wouldn't say it's essential in the same way that the BBV and the myth makers tabulate and mirror each other at different ends of John's life professionally. But I think that this is very much your veneer account of tabulating the production of the 80s decade of Doctor Who.
Yeah.
I think it's entertaining for that. I think there are some stories that I think you get a sense almost by omission of what that working environment day to day was like.
Yeah.
But I think that I wouldn't say it's essential, but it's a nice addition to the canon.
I don't think you walk away from it if you're a Doctor Who fan in 2000 going, I learned anything new.
No.
I think all of those stories are available in articles and interviews with various people.
But you do walk away humming the Arnold Rimmer theme tune. So there is a silver lining to be had there.
And with a decade plus gone from the show, very little is given over to anything else, as we said. But he talks for about 2 minutes at the end about his current work. And
there's about 30 seconds on the shard of VHS as well.
And you sort of go, reading between the lines, you go, oh, he hasn't been up to that much. And then when you get to the Marsden book, you go, oh, fuck, that was
why.
Yeah, it was a bleak couple of decades for him.
Too hot for TV.
So, JNT, The Life and Scandalous Times of John Nathan Turner.
This is the main course, ladies and gentlemen. We've had our starters. Now we're moving on to our main.
It was written by Richard Marson. It came out in April 2013 and then released again in December 2016 and March 2022. Originally published by Milk Publishing, it's now out with the wonderful 10 Acre Films. News at the time, Billy Piper and David Tennant are returning to Doctor Who for the 50th anniversary.
Who knows how that would go?
Exactly. And the Ice Warriors was being animated. On TV, we had The Rings of Akaten, Cold War, Hyde, and Journey to the Centre of the TARDIS.
Cold War, which has got possibly one of the best fucking ensemble casts, and the names in that are amazing.
I know.
Josh O'Connor, Liam Cunningham, Tobias Menzies, David Warner. Fucking hell. That's like a who's who of who.
And can anybody remember anything about those characters?
No, Jenna Coleman got wet. That's about all I can remember. That was a great episode for that.
Releases at the time, we had Babel Sphere, which was from Audio Go and Big Finish as part of their Destiny of the Doctors run. The audiobook of The Rescue had just come out. From BBC Books, we had Plague of the Cybermen, The Dalek Generation, and Shroud of Sorrows.
Oh, the Dalek Generation, Jesus.
A classic. And
ask Joe Ford, see what he thinks about it.
Then from Big Finish, we had Eldrad Must Die, The Library of Alexandria, and New Frontiers, and the comic strip was The Hunters of the Burning Stone, featuring the 11th Doctor, Ian, and Barbara.
That was wonderful. That was wonderfully done.
Indeed. Now, what a book. What a fucking book.
Where the fuck do we begin with this? Wow. I would say the definitive text on John.
Absolutely.
The definitive text. For better or worse, and I will just preface our discussion here by saying I find Richard Marson to be exceptionally fair on John by presenting not only his follies and his foibles, but also his successes, and painting a picture of what was a very complicated and contradictory man.
Indeed. It's interesting that whenever anybody says something remotely bad, he always counterbalances it and goes, well, I'm not just going to take you for your word that John is this sort of person. Mm-hmm. He will ask everybody else and paint the picture out of the nuances of all of those people to give as you say, a fair and balanced view.
Well, it's Rashomon, isn't it? 6 people see the same situation and the same event, and we all have different perceptions and interpretations of how we walk away and perceive that.
Yeah. So the Chris Chapman documentary that was on one of the Blu-ray box sets is great, but it's a much more sanitized version.
Yeah.
And I think quite rightly so, because the angle is a celebration of John's life at that point.
Yeah.
It's on an official box set. It doesn't stray away from the controversy. It strays away from his sex life. That's what it doesn't cover. I think that's fair.
The Showman, which is a superb documentary. I actually saw that at the BFI prior to the season 18 Logopolis screening. And Logopolis, as I've said before, is probably my favourite story in Who, tied with Survival. But I found Showman an incredibly complex watch in terms of that. It doesn't go into the details and the nitty-gritty of John's intimate life like this book does. But I found it to be as even-handed as Richard's book, but by necessity more Doctor Who orientated than The Life and Scandalous Times is, which is more about a portrait of the man.
Absolutely. It uses the word scandalous in the title, obviously. Is it scandalous?
I think that's probably down to some quite financially lucrative marketing. I think we look back, and this book, as we said, came out in 2013. Looking back retrospectively from the lens of 2025, 11 years on, we were at a different stage then in society where, you've touched upon about how autobiographies were serialized in tabloid newspapers. We were in an Andrew Morton type era of how you sold a product by sex and debauchery, and nowadays I think that we look at that product a lot more evenly, and we're prepared to say that action would be cancelable, but this is the context of the situation around it. And I think that we didn't have that maturity of marketing at that time.
Absolutely. And it's interesting to note that in the revised version of the book...
Totally tasteless, it's been renamed.
Totally tasteless.
Which is the version I've got.
Well, I've got both.
Oh, have you?
And the only difference is the titles change, the covers change, and there's that section sort of on the making and writing of the book.
Well, from an art perspective, because, that's kind of my bent, Totally Tasteless has got a wonderful kind of faux painting, like Target cover of John in one of his resplendent Hawaiian shirts, which I love.
Absolutely. It's a wonderful cover. And at the end, there's that making of, and he talks about being offered by tabloids to serialize it, offered money for copies of the book because they want to run a story. And ultimately, they do run a story.
Right in the run-up to the 50th anniversary.
And it's a bit of a non-story, and it goes away very quickly. But it is a headline for a bit of, Doctor Who producer... praise on young fans. And like the press are going to do what the press are going to do. I don't blame Marson for that. But what really annoyed me at the time was the headline was a picture of JNT with Colin. And so
that's not fair.
It makes it look like there's a story about Colin.
And that's not fair. But again, it is one chapter of a book. For all, and I'm not trivializing anything that's contained within that chapter, but it's presented as one chapter in a book. And I think that to take that out of context, it does not only the book a disservice, but does the reader a disservice and denies them the opportunity to be informed enough to look at the situation as it is on its merits of what happened.
Absolutely. What I will say is I feel differently about that chapter now than when I read it first time round. First time round, I was like, oh, it's a man breaking the law it's an unjust law. But actually, reading it now, I'm like, he forcibly pursues a lot of young men.
And that's, absolutely.
I can't...
You can't reconcile that with your own morality.
Yeah, exactly.
I find it incredibly disconcerting.
I was 10 years younger, but even more so when I read it. I think I was in my late 20s. So wherever I was with my own morality, not that I was particularly on a sliding... I just hadn't opened myself up to that sort of thing, I guess you'd say, and really considered the implications of his actions.
My late father always used to say that, that one of the cruelties of life and time is that the acquired wisdom we get makes us view the world in a more enlightened way and a more morally just way as we get older. And you do look, and that's why we can, as human beings, go back and reread books that we've read 6, 7, 8 times before, all the way through our life, and we will find something different in it every time because we are not the same person that's read that book.
Absolutely. So how does John come across this time round?
Incredibly contradictory, a complex man, and I think a man that was never truly happy with that particular station of where he was at any particular time. He was an ambitious young man. Bill Sellers in the BBC of the early to mid 70s saw something in John. He hadn't come up the traditional way that, as we've touched on earlier, a lot of these university educated producers like Jonathan Powell. John had come up via being a PUM and AFM. He'd come up via direct experience on the studio floor. He'd endeared himself to his contemporaries like Chris Doyley John and Graham Williams, who gave him those opportunities.
Yeah.
He was a fiercely ambitious young man. And I think that he always had one eye on the horizon. And I think that sort of sense of restlessness just adds to the tragedy of what unfolded in later years.
His ambition really comes across in those early things.
Oh, absolutely. God, yeah.
And it's really interesting to see that ambition sort of die across the course of the book. It's really sad because Doctor Who was just this weight around his neck that was supposed to be the making of his career as a producer. And I have no doubt he could have produced other TV shows incredibly well. But I think his big mistake, and we're not the first people to say this, was getting too close to the fans.
Yes.
And if he'd have kept them at arm's length, like within the BBC, he was forever known as the guy who was so involved in that world of fandom and saw himself as a little bit of a celebrity in that respect.
Absolutely.
And enjoyed that. But as a result, people are sneering behind his back almost and going, what a weird guy in a weird world. Like who else would want to do that? We don't want to put any of our other producers through that because it's no longer the prestige show it was.
It's interesting. I remember on one of the DVDs, there's a because obviously for John's first season, Barry was there as an executive kind of consulting producer, guiding John in, because John talks about in the BBV that he was acting up as a producer for the first 2 seasons in the role. And that first year that he had Barry with him, which was Tom's last, and John's basically learning on the job. And there's anecdotes there that even, and this is pre-Eric Sayward, and people talk about how John goes to conventions in America. And I think Barry Letts mentions on one of the DVDs that John went to a convention and left a script just with the writer of the week, and the writer couldn't give the producer any sort of feedback on it because the producer was unobtainable. And you have to sit there and think none of these things happen in isolation. And clearly Barry Letts wasn't the first nor the last person to have this situation come up, and people began to associate that sort of skewed focus to the more ephemeral parts of the job and the more the conventioneering circuit, and looked upon that in an unfavorable light.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think he liked the attention. He liked the fame.
Absolutely, he was a kingpin of his empire.
But it was a weird empire that was ultimately going to crumble. And it was definitely, I think, retrospectively a mistake for him to spend so much time going to conventions when he should have been concentrating on making the
actual
show.
Product. Yeah, absolutely.
It's just like, you just don't behave like that. And actually, I'm surprised he got away with it. I'm surprised
even through the lens of the 80s. You look at it, and it's easy for us to say, well, we don't really know the context of it. And as I always say, my key phrase is context is king there. But you didn't see the series producer Howard's Way going down to a yacht convention in Salford, did you? And
Russell T Davies says himself that he learned from JNT how not to produce. I think Russell thinks JNT is a great producer. I think, but how not to interact with the fans.
He keeps Russell, for all of what a lot of people have said about Russell. Russell is very, very adept at playing the showman to promote the product.
Yeah.
But he keeps the more fringe, ephemeral parts of the fan community at arm's length. And I do think that strengthens the integrity of the final product.
Well, I remember when Doctor Who came back and the DWAS issued a statement where they said, we've approached the BBC and the production office about, our status as the official Doctor Who fan club, and they've declined to have anything to do with us.
Yeah.
Which was the right choice.
Yeah, absolutely.
And even though it was completely different people at that point, it was a bad idea letting all those fans get so involved in the show, even if not involved in the show, involved in the world that surrounds it.
It's interesting. I read a lot of, and there's some great articles from Andrew Pixley, and I vividly remember reading a set report from Patrick Mulkern about as a younger man, visiting the set of Time and the Rani. And I just find it astonishing how, with such regularity, then you had fans and school trips visiting sets and the production gallery of a TV show and production like that. I cannot correlate how that in a 2025 context, how we would have, class 4B of Upper Glyndonbourne Wyndham High Grammar School visiting the set of Wishworld and the Reality War. I just think it's just a different world.
Like, to get a set visit now, you've got to really have an in.
Absolutely. And I think that it's, as I've said, I think it strengthens the integrity of the product if you do have that sense of professional decorum and distance.
Yeah, and they don't do fan cons these days until they've left the show.
That's it.
I've never seen Russell never does fan conventions.
Russell's never done a fan convention. A lot of his contemporaries, like Joel Collins, Julie Gardner, Phil Collinson, they've all done Gallifrey 1, which in many years has become, like, the flagship convention of the show, especially internationally. But no, Russell's never done it, and I think that is the right decision for somebody who is and has taken on that onus of being the captain of the ship at the front of the mast.
How do the fans come across in this book?
The fans come across as, well, I'm going to go back to that term again, entitled, and unaware of their corrosive impact, not only on John as a person, but also on the show that they claim to love.
Yeah.
Because there is undoubtedly a mea culpa element that has to be shouldered by the community in that time for the corrosive damage they did and the part they played towards the cancellation of the show.
Yeah.
Because you have to sit there and think, if you are Peter Cushing, if you are Jonathan Powell, if you're sitting there in an office and you are getting a starburst where the script editor's lambasting his producer, and you're getting DWB and there's a 17-page article about how John's destroying the show. These are the people who are its biggest champions.
Yeah.
And so you sit there and think, well, who are we making this for?
Yeah, you just want that problem to go away.
Yeah,
which
absolutely.
Is a phrase that comes up a lot in the book. Jan Vincent Rudzitsky.
I'm just going to refer to him now as JVR because I'm not going to make that error in pronunciation.
Indeed. So JVR comes across as a complete prick in this.
Yeah, and again, very corrosive in the kind of, maybe he wasn't aware of how his behavior was inextricably going to have an effect on the show that he loved. But wow, yeah.
There is a moment in the book where, and this is like a contemporary interview to the book, where JVR talks about trying to take props and models from the set, as apparently he'd always done. He used to go in there late at night because he worked at the BBC and take them. And John catches him and tells him he can't. And he goes, well, I just didn't see why I shouldn't be allowed to take this stuff.
It's just
crazy.
And
it's like, you get sacked for that now for a start.
Can you imagine the man who works at Odeon in Leamington Spa saying, I am taking that 7-foot cutout of Robert Downey Jr. and I don't understand why I can't.
Yeah.
It's just bizarre.
It's really odd. And there's a lot of talk of like, oh, he's just going to be on the show temporarily, but we're going to be here forever. Like the entitlement of 80s fans.
It's off the chart.
It's like, and I guess it's because it's the first time a fandom's really existed and it's finding its legs and they're able to communicate and they're organised and all these things. But they do not come across well, and J&T should have steered clear. But they come across as the baddies in this.
Yeah,
absolutely. And I can completely see why someone like Keith Barnfather was like, I do not want to be interviewed for this, because he's a family man. He runs a business, and I'm sure, I don't want to speak for him, but I think there's probably, he always says he got on well with John and had some issues with him, but I can absolutely see why he would not want to tell accounts of how he behaved when he was 18 years old.
No, because I think ultimately Keith is a professional, and he understands that, again, there's context of the time, but there's very little that's going to be gained by engaging in some sort of sensationalist muckraking years after the fact.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the fans don't come across well. Some of them do, especially the ones he helped later in life and things like that. Like, we talk about the negatives, but J&T feels very, very generous with his time for so many people. He could definitely be rude. He could definitely snap. He could definitely turn on people. But I think he genuinely wants to help people and will if he can.
I think it's great, and I think a credit to him is how his era of the show was so inclusive about taking submissions from effectively completely unknown writers.
Yeah.
And look at the careers that that spawned, and some of the stories we got that were as a direct result of that open submission policy.
Yeah.
And
I always, I can't remember if it's in the book, but I always remember Gary Russell saying in an interview that, when they got the License to Do Big Finish, John was so happy for them and was just like, you guys deserve this. Like, well done. It's amazing.
And that says a lot.
Yeah.
That says a lot.
How did the BBC come across?
It's very interesting to look at the BBC through the 80s, because I think that it's very interesting to look at it as a corporate entity, because in the light of retrospect, it's becoming increasingly apparent from things like your Longleats, from things like your Gallifrey ones, for things like your Chicago TARDIS, for things like your overseas conventions, for the exhibitions, for your Blackpool. This is a program that makes money for the corporation.
Yeah.
However, the individuals who are at the corporation don't understand and don't want to understand that particular program, because it doesn't fit with their aesthetic of what they believe event television in the 1980s is.
Yeah.
We're talking Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. We're talking Threads. We're talking Edge of Darkness with Bob Peck. It doesn't fit with that prestige television.
Yeah.
It's considered to be an outlier in that respect, and yet nobody can quite decide how to take the brand forward post the 20th anniversary in 1983, because once we've had the 5 Doctors, it's become apparent, looking at these various mediums, that it's now a show that has passed an anniversary, that has been going on time, and the BBC likes to market something as having something to work towards.
Yeah.
And Who was just this thing, like all creatures, that had been there for ages and was just motoring into the darkness.
Yeah.
With
Treading
no
water.
Yeah.
And I think we see this a little bit now in terms of Doctor Who. Is we talked earlier about the anniversaries. We've had the big anniversary. We've had the big launch of the new Doctor. But it's very much business as usual on British television.
Absolutely. I think there's always a part of that with the Doctor's second season.
Yeah.
Because you are dealing with an established actor by that point. And so you do have to rely on various other publicity tricks to kind of engage your audience, be that a new companion, a season-long arc, a certain attention-grabbing guest stars. I get it, but you have to. An audience is engaged when they feel that there is a point that you are motoring towards, and I believe that's where Marvel succeeds to an extent, having a phase 5, phase 6. Everything has a carefully delineated beginning, middle, and an end point.
Yeah.
Whereas Doctor Who doesn't have that.
John comes across as someone that, he was trying to leave the show. He wanted to move on to other things. There are different types of producer in the industry. Some of them are very good with money. Some are very good at raising money. Some are very good with scripts and development. Some are very good at just getting the show made.
Of course, yeah.
And I think in the BBC at that time, you kind of had to be all those things. And as television's changed, people have realised it's why you have line producers, executive producers, associate producers, co-producers, all these things. Everybody goes, what do they do?
You're curating everybody to their strength.
Yeah, it's actually a specific. Each of those people will have a specific skill set. Like one of them is literally and there is an art to this, talent management.
Yeah,
and when you've
I don't doubt that at all.
Yeah, when you've got big actors, big directors,
big egos,
yeah. Big corporations involved, just managing those relationships can be a full-time job.
Yeah, you're effectively an entertainment diplomat. Aren't you?
Exactly. And I think John was very much good at making the show happen, good at budgets, good with talent, good at publicity, not that strong on the creative side. And nowadays, he would have a producing role which absolutely played to all his skills.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, he had to be all those things at the time.
Yeah.
And
because that's what was expected.
Yeah. But then, Graham Williams, I would say, not very good at publicity. Just about getting the show made, but it looks like dog shit.
He could manage. He had Douglas Adams with him,
exactly.
And Douglas Adams will sail you through many things.
And Bob Holmes.
Yeah. peerless people in their profession.
So it's not like all these other producers have necessarily got it all. I just think John was more exposed to criticism because he was more exposed to the fan community. Also, they're a generation of fans and indeed viewers and us retrospectively as well, who are media literate.
Yeah.
So we understand the role of a producer and things like that, and it's easy to sort of point out the mistakes retrospectively. I really feel for John in this book that his career doesn't go his way.
I think John realizes, and I'm not going to use the word trapped by Doctor Who. I think John, post the Five Doctors, which was arguably the pivot that he should and could have used to have left the show. It becomes apparent in subsequent years that there were various situations that arose that prohibited him from leaving the show.
Yeah.
John talks in the BBV documentary about how there was an incredibly revolving door of controllers at the BBC, be that head of drama, head of series and serials. And each of those individuals saw John as somebody who was a steady hand, who'd been on this show for several years, who knew how to bring it in under budget, on time, with increasingly diminished financial resources.
Yeah.
And just thought, well, this guy knows what he's doing. It might not be the exact product we want, but it'll get the show done. It'll get it on air.
Yeah.
Let's just have him do it for another year. And John talks in that documentary about a prevailing attitude of it'll do because it's Doctor Who.
Yeah.
And I think that neglect crept in because it became increasingly apparent to him that he wasn't going to be presented with the opportunities to do anything else, because he had become so inextricably linked with this brand.
Do you think he should have had a career post Doctor Who?
I think realistically, the options were there for him to have moved on to arguably something more in the stream of light entertainment. I think he would have loved that. I can see John working on a version of a program like Strictly Come Dancing, with the glitz and the glamour and the celebrities and the talent management. I think he probably would have enjoyed that tremendously more with that vaudevillian style more than drama.
I think he would have done well on a soap as well.
Yeah. Well, El Dorado was how many years later? 2 years later? 3 years later?
He would have been perfect for that. And I do think he could have produced other dramas, because there's good stuff, but he has to have a good, decent relationship with his script editor. And ultimately, he didn't have that with Eric Saywood. And that's when the show's going through its worst. Like, everybody knows the Saywood story. Everybody knows that things were better when Andrew Cartmel shows up. People that I don't think give enough credit to Christopher Bidmead for having a relationship that works with John as well.
And it just shows you how much of a burnout position it was by how quickly Anthony Roots moved on.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people forget about Anthony Root and the time he was there between Bidmead and Saywood, you know. But he was there, and it just shows you that was a position that just burned through people.
Yeah. And so you can see why Saywood burnt out. Also, Saywood's an odd choice for script editor. His writing credentials are virtually nil. Like, he's done a couple of radio things. And
it's interesting. He's pretty much hired off the back of the individual success of The Visitation.
Yeah.
Which is basically like me coming up to you with a 2-page treatment for, I don't know, a new series, and then you hiring me to take over Coronation Street based on that. It's just bizarre.
It is. And I think Saywood's a good writer, or can be a good writer. I largely enjoyed the Doctor Who's that he wrote, but whatever he's doing to get those scripts in shape just isn't working.
No.
And not only the bizarre thing of letting them keep their jobs after the 85 hiatus, where they definitely should have been moved on, but the fact that they just seem to sit there and do nothing and then end up in the same position they're always in, of just not having any scripts that work.
Well, Trial's a very interesting thing, because they decided to do a very meta commentary on it by having the show on Trial as well, which I can understand it. And the original conception of it that I understand is Who's version of A Christmas Carol, with past, present and future. But surely in any industry, if you are to suspend somebody whose work has been underperforming to your own perception, you don't then rehire that person and give them the creative latitude to do exactly what they were doing before.
Right.
It makes no sense.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. It's very odd. And at the very least, like, I mean, maybe we should have had Andrew Cartmel a season earlier. And
Yeah, I think so. I think that, and it shows you, because it becomes increasingly apparent that nobody at the BBC knew what to do with Doctor Who.
No.
There's tales of Jonathan Powell and Michael Grade approaching Sidney Newman and asking him out for lunch
Yeah.
for Sidney Newman's ideas about what to do to revitalise public interest in the show.
You wouldn't get an old creative behind the show back these days.
You
would you?
certainly wouldn't get one that suggests hiring a female doctor and then an old actor to come back to the role. I mean, both those ideas are unheard of.
Absolutely. How does Gary Downey come across in this book?
Yeah, Gary Downey, I would like to say he comes across well, but I'd be lying. Because he doesn't. Gary Downey comes across as something and someone that was toxic to John.
Yeah.
I'm sure they loved each other very, very deeply. I'm sure their bond was a very strong one. But you are left in no illusion with this book that Gary was very bad for John,
Yeah.
professionally and personally, and that and it's not an aspect of things that's unique to this book, to anything. It's human relationships. Unfortunately, sometimes we have partners who bring out the worst aspects of ourselves.
Yeah.
And are toxic to us. And it would seem to me, having not met the men previously in that respect, but that this was one of those partnerships, and it just simply brought out the wrong aspects in each other.
Absolutely. It's Gary Downey comes across. I mean, nobody likes him.
No, and that's universal, because usually if you take a litmus test of people, some people will say, "Oh, well, I liked him, I liked her, I didn't like when he did that, she shouldn't have done that." Everybody's universal in their dislike of Gary Downey.
And it says a lot about John that people were willing to stick around for John, essentially, and put up with Gary.
You had to put up with Gary to be near John.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's just toxic, jealous, a real bitch.
Yeah. Yeah.
A real bitch. And it's such a shame that, because the story it's John's book, but there is a sort of the mini Gary Downey biography within it. Like, if you took just the Gary stuff out of it, you'd get probably like a novella's worth.
Oh, absolutely. And I remember Gary's interview in Doctor Who magazine, after John passed, and it was, and I can, my family have all gone now, so I totally understand what grief does to you and how it affects your worldview. But I look at it and I think, it's some of the stuff he's saying there about people that he and John worked with is just so incredibly bitter and unprofessional.
Yeah. I don't know whether you get any revelations in the Gary Downey interview. I think he thinks he's giving them, but
I think it reflects worse on him.
Yeah, they've all sort of been disproved of him. Just comes across as a bit of a complete bitch. But there we go. It doesn't have a happy ending, unfortunately. The book.
No, as life doesn't sometimes. Should John have been given more opportunities? Absolutely. Did he get himself into a position where those opportunities were denied of him and it sent him further into a spiral? Yes. Is it one of the greatest tragedies that he never lived to see the show get reborn so successfully again as a British institution? Undoubtedly. But unfortunately, life doesn't always have the ending and the morality that we deserve. Unfortunately
not. And it's not just the Doctor Who thing sort of ending, because we find him, as we said, in his Mythmakers at the end of his Doctor Who career, but with a life ahead of him.
And he's so optimistic in that Mythmakers with Nick Briggs. Yeah. So optimistic, so upbeat.
And we find that there wasn't really a life. There was, stints at local radio, corporate videos, desperately trying to get TV shows off the ground, most of which were rubbish as well.
Yeah.
And it's just so sad that he never had like another big hit. And I don't necessarily mean like a big TV show, but never had something else he made a success of.
He was never given the opportunity to really add another professional line to his creative CV.
Exactly.
He deserved that at the very least.
And his spiral down into just alcoholism, there's the stories at the end of like him directing a panto or something like that, and he's getting through a bottle of vodka in the morning while sort of directing. It's that's
desperately sad.
And that's another sort of thing of the toxic relationship, because if I was drinking too much, my partner would say to me, "You're drinking too much."
and she would exercise her care to help you out of
Yeah.
that situation. Yeah,
Whereas John and Gary egg each other on, and there's always those things in those situations where if you're a drug addict and you are sat around with a bunch of other drug addicts, you kind of feel vindicated in your behavior because it's like, oh, it's not just me.
sure.
If you're doing those things alone and people spot you, there will be like a thing of, do you need some help actually? And because John hasn't got a partner saying you need some help, he's got a partner saying let's have a drink.
Yeah,
Like there's just no way out for him, and it's really sad. In that
it is.
respect.
It's desperately sad, the situation that he found himself in. You know, it's we are all the cumulative result of our life choices, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we shouldn't be afforded an opportunity to try and better ourselves and make the world better for other people around us. You know, and I
Yeah.
don't think he was given that opportunity.
Unfortunately, not. It was a dour ending for the book.
It was.
And when it talks about where his grave is and stuff like that at the end, and I was sad at the end of it. I was like, what
Yeah, you kind of get your cumulative impression of so much unfulfilled potential, don't you? You know, and all that creativity and joy de vivre at the beginning that was left untapped. And there's a lot of cautionary tales to be told in John's life story.
Yeah. About how to behave professionally,
Yeah,
about
absolutely.
substance abuse, about how to behave, like all things we sort of take for granted in terms of like our attitudes towards sex and sexuality now. Like there's some cautionary tales in there.
Yeah, life is as my late father used to say, you know, the journey is the destination, and every day is another opportunity to make yourself a better person and the world better for people around you.
Yeah.
And I think that if there is lessons to be learned from John's story, it is that you've got to take heed of that, and you never let yourself get, you know, into a position where you feel that you can't make life better for those people you love.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have much more you want to say on this book?
It's a superb book. I think, as I said, it's the definitive tome on John and his life. It is an uncomfortable read, but it mirrors life because, you know, that is the nature of our existence, that we do have facets of ourselves that are unpalatable.
Yeah.
And I think, but again, like I said, I'm going to circle back to what I said at the start, and that I believe Richard Marson always tries his very best to portray an even-handed portrayal of John and his complexities.
Absolutely. It's a fantastic book. I've read it twice. I'll probably read it again in another 10 years. Like it's that
where we'll
good a book.
probably have a completely different outlook on various things as well when life kind of presents us with a different lens.
Yeah, exactly.
Too hot for TV.
After sort of reviewing these things today, do we feel we've got a handle on who JNT was?
Yeah, I think as much as anybody can ever kind of understand an other individual, I think that the myriad of different mediums that we've looked at today cumulatively give us a creative impression of just who John Nathan Turner was, and not just his contribution to the world of Doctor Who, but his contribution to other people.
Yeah.
And who he was as an individual.
Absolutely. Like, he's a kind, caring, bitchy, selfish, happy, miserable force of nature.
He is
tired old drunk.
He's a thesaurus of emotion. A thesaurus of emotion.
And it feels like he is the extremes of all of those things, you know?
Often at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. It's a fascinating look into his life across all of these things. And I really, really wish, you know, what would he'd be in his 70s now, but I wish he had lived to see the show that he clearly cared about.
Yeah.
You know, become the big hit it was. And
I always remember that picture from SFX magazine of Russell T Davies and Verity Lambert doing an interview together, and just the joy that she had at seeing the show reach such pinnacles of success again. And I think we would have had that with John.
Yeah.
I think John would have been overjoyed to have seen how successful Who became again.
Out of all of these releases, I'm assuming the Marston book is your favourite?
The Marson book, I think, is the most completest. Oh, and if I was to recommend any one individual medium to people, it would be the Marson book, because it is the definitive word on the man through the not just his words, but the eyes and lens of the people around him, to present a fair portrayal of who John was. But I think in terms of, as well, I would also add as a caveat, if you want an idea of what Doctor Who creatively was at a stage in its life as we entered the wilderness in 1990, I would certainly recommend The Mythmakers.
Yeah.
Because I think, as I've said, it is a time capsule of a program that was perceived to be in irreversible decline, entering a period where it was now off air, and it's how that was perceived by the general public and indeed by the people that worked on it. Yeah. And I found that particularly fascinating.
Absolutely. I think all of these releases have their merits.
Yeah.
Obviously, Totally Tasteless is a standout release. I think the weakest is his own memoirs. I think they're too sanitized and too party line.
Yeah, I think they suffer by comparison, because it doesn't afford you the nuance to see the journey that both the individual and the program were on.
Absolutely.
And it suffers from that.
Is there anything you'd like to push before we disappear?
Well, absolutely. I mean, those of you who've been forced to endure my inane ramblings alongside this fine young gentleman before will know that my main creative outlook is I sketch, and I would like to say, as the youngsters say, I do art. And so I draw people. I use a style which is called hyperrealism. One of my creative inspirations is the Lord thy God, Alistair Pearson, who I view as the definitive Doctor Who portrait artist. So for those of you who want to check out my creative oeuvre, as it were, you can find me on Instagram. I'm there as Artfully Liam. That's all one word. Artfully is gratefully. Liam, as in the lesser spotted character of Emmerdale, who usually gets assaulted. And you can find me there. I'm currently undertaking a project where I'm doing a hand-drawn poster for each episode of the 2025 season. That's 2025 spelt 1989. And you can see it there. And tell me where you think that I can improve, which I always like to hear. So yeah, there you go.
Excellent. Well, thanks again for coming and
my
talking
eternal
to me
pleasure,
today.
sir.
Next time, I'll be joined by Jim Allenby, and we'll be talking about the documentary Resistance is Useless and the Big Finish audio The Grey Man of the Mountain. But until next time, I've been Dylan.
And I've been Liam Nathan Turner.
And this has been Doctor Who Too Hot for TV.
Stay tuned.
There are pathways leading to potential futures. We've still got the mystery of that bright and blazing ending. And there's Susan, of course. I wonder if we'll ever find out who the boss is or who the boss are. But we don't know what's happening yet. While everybody works that out, I'll take a pause from this page. Thanks for reading. And until next time, this has been an absolute joy.
Too hot for TV.
Petrol.